For the book review assignment, I read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Essentially, this book details the history of a life of the woman named Henrietta Lacks during the 1950s, when there was much medical experimentation, but very little ethical and moral regulation of this testing, especially for African American patients, due to the country's race relations. This book details Henrietta's past, her history, as well as the medical discoveries that came from her disease, while bringing to light various unethical practices of doctors only 60 years ago in this country. Henrietta Lacks had been diagnosed with cervical cancer, and when she went to seek treatment for her cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital, many scientists were trying to grow cells in a culture dish. Even though many scientists all over the world were attempting to create what is called the immortal cell, almost all had failed. It was not until the scientist named George Guy received a sampling of Henrietta's cells that this feat was accomplished. While Henrietta was receiving her treatment of radium, the only known treatment for cancer at the time, her doctor took a small sample of cells from both her cervix and her cervical tumor. The doctor did not inform her of such a procedure, nor did he ask for her consent. As soon as the sample was collected, the doctor shipped the cells under the name Gila, the first two letters of her first and last name of the patient, to the Guy lab, where the lab technicians began to treat the cells for life in a culture dish. To everyone's surprise, the cancerous cells began to grow unlike any of the cells that the lab had tried to grow previously. In its success, the Guy Lab sent samples across the world to various labs that wanted to test the cells and experiment with new treatments for the different diseases, or to study the way that a cell worked when injected with different pathogens or viruses. The cancer cells were being injected to prisoners' arms, even to test if cancer was contagious. The entire time, the cells were being referred to as Gila, and no one knew the patient whose cells had been taken, nor did Henrietta's family know about the cells. Over the course of a few years, Gila cells were beginning to make history. They helped to discover vaccines, treatments, and cures for various diseases and viruses. For me, the most impressive of these uses was the creation of the polio vaccine. But even though the cells were doing great things, Henrietta's family was still a poor African American family struggling through the 1950s. It wasn't until very many years later that the family would learn about Henrietta's cells, and even still, they were not compensated or recognized. Skloot spends a majority of the book discussing how the family did not know about the cells and highlighting the unethical implications of such procedures. Henrietta's life is considered immortal today because her cells and their legacies continue to live on. While this book did not really focus on the functions of a body or a cell, or how the experimentation occurred beyond the simple facts of injecting a virus into the cell and watching it duplicate, I did learn a lot about how a cell culture works. Cells from the human body are both extremely vulnerable and extremely resilient outside of the body. I learned that if cells are not surrounded in the correct culture medium, which is the fluid that surrounds a sample of cells in a culture disc, the cell will most likely die. However, when the cell is put in the correct medium, one that accurately resembles the inside of a human body in terms of temperature, pH, consistency, and makeup, a cell is easily able to survive and reproduce. Throughout the 50s, half of the struggle of creating immortal cells was keeping them alive and finding the right medium. Various labs were testing all sorts of different combinations of materials to create the ideal cultural medium, but the Guy Lab came up with the one that worked. Their culture medium included the plasma of chickens, puree of calf fetuses, special salts, and blood from human umbilical cord. So there were lots of different things going on and lots of different experimentation for it. The largest issue of controversy that arose in this book was the idea of informed consent. Throughout the entirety of the book, from the time that the doctors collected the samples from Henrietta's cells to the time that they began to test the cells on human beings, no one ever informed any patient of the procedure that they were about to undergo. Many prisoners were even injected with cancerous cells that they did not even know about. Most ended up with cancer, and even when doctors tried to remove the tumor, the cancer still remained and came back. These patients were told that they were receiving routine vaccines rather than undergoing medical testing and experimentation. Most doctors did not want to tell their patients about the experimentation for fear that they would scare them off. Clearly, this is wrong and immoral. Henrietta Lacks's story marks the beginning of the emphasis on informed consent in the United States. Once people figured out what happened to her and all the other people being tested, lots of effort was put into creating systems that stopped such immoral and unethical behavior by doctors. Today, there are many boards, federal institutions, and laws regulating the type of research that you can perform on human subjects, as well as what you must tell the patients participating in the trials. So overall, even though I was not a huge fan of the author's writing style or the arc of her narration, I really did enjoy the story. I liked the fact that the book was about a person and her family, not about a cell or a disease or a biography of a scientist. The science behind it ended up working its way in because it was completely inherent in the story, rather than being the focus of the book. I would definitely recommend the book to someone who is interested in more than just science. Anyone who is interested in the connection between science, along with social movements, African American history, and the study of ethics should definitely read this book. In a way, this book was almost perfect for me. Overall, I really did enjoy this project, and I was very pleased with how eye-opening this book ended up being.